Hello, Benjamin. Thanks for joining us in Scouted by Graby. And it's very good to have you here. And I've read about Restock over the past few weeks a lot, and that's why I just wanted to get in touch with you and really talk about what your technology and the things Restock is doing. So, can you take me through what Restock is about and what you guys are doing in basically for a in layman terms, or basically just
Yeah,
explaining the tech?
for
Yeah.
sure. So, yeah, and thank you for inviting us. Very happy to share some more information about Restock. We're a company that is focused on valorizing agricultural residues regionally with a global mindset. What does that mean? It means that at the end of food crop harvests, mainly, there is often straws or there's leftovers that are in the field. And we're focused on taking and valorizing the feedstocks when there's an abundance of feedstock. So it's really important to understand that not all feedstock everywhere is usable. Not all agricultural waste can be taken. It needs to go back to the land. There's historical usage. So you really need to build out an ecosystem and understand how to manage the agricultural waste. And by the way, it's not waste anymore. It's a real co-product from that, and we valorize it, which helps bring a new revenue stream to the farming community. And then we process it using various technologies to then transform it and valorize the different aspects, whether it's the cellulose, the lignins, the hemicellulose, or the sugars. So we kind of have that ecosystem being built around these new technologies. And then we produce products anywhere from molded packaging. I have a product here right now that we just got recently tested. It's a spoon or a scooper. And we then are looking to displace products that are mainly wood based and plastic based in the marketplace.
Okay, that sounds very exciting, replacing plastic with agricultural waste. Because I think the problem that I have seen, and I wouldn't say problem, it's a challenge I've seen in materials that are aimed to replace plastic, is that they usually don't have enough feedstock, or they're more costly and expensive than plastic options. So, how is Restock's products in terms of competitiveness against cost and production compared to plastic?
No, and a really good point. It is all about unit economics. We're not going to be shifting over products if we're more expensive than petrochemicals. So, at the basis of it all, it is about understanding where and how. And what we do is focused on being at parity with products already in the marketplace, so that when we come to a customer, we're not saying this is a premium, this is a niche. This is actually a product that is at a point where we can compete with these products that are in the market and actually replace them at cost.
That's great. So not only you are price competitive, but you give an incentive to these companies that they can move over from plastic and actually adopt some sustainable solution without compromising their profit margins. That sounds very exciting. So Benjamin, like when I was reading about restock, and you also mentioned that there's abundance of agricultural waste that you can reuse. So just wanted your views about it. So do you see any feedstock issue coming up as you scale and as you like incorporate more agricultural waste into producing more products?
No, I don't think at this stage, and not for a long time. It's very important to understand that agricultural residues are being used for a lot of different materials. But at this stage, currently, we're in an abundance of agricultural residues. I think, let's have a conversation in 10 years, and hopefully there'll be more issues there. But with the agricultural residues, they keep increasing with our food production. And so our food production keeps on increasing. So there is something relatively linear in that growth. So we don't see that issue. And it's really important to know that we work very closely with farming communities, and we're helping build a revenue stream for them. So we're building a lot of stability through that process. Also, finally, is you can't do it everywhere, right? So it's very much about geostrategic locations. You need to be close to the raw material so that you're not increasing costs of transportation and processing.
Yes, yes, and that this is a very interesting point you have picked, that you need to be closer to the locations from where you can source your raw materials. So, which geolocations or countries do you see as like the biggest opportunity for restock to grow?
So right now we're really in the vision of building what we call agri hubs. The idea is that it's locations where there's the intersection of the raw material, so the raw material availability, the natural resources. So, do we have water and energy? Are we going to be in a desert in 10, 15 years? Probably not a good place to do it. And then on the other end is what are the industries that need those products regionally? All those things combined then kind of define ultimately the different regions that are worthwhile for us to build hubs in. So we're working about 45 minutes east of Paris right now. We have a project in Vietnam, where I am currently, about an hour southwest of Ho Chi Minh City, which is right between the Mekong Delta and the city. In France, we're right near Paris, but we're also in one of the most concentrated areas of wheat straw. And then we are also developing a project in the United States in similar fashion, where proximity to the raw material is essential, as well as industry. So to answer your question, is those are the three hubs that we're working on. We believe that we'll build hubs kind of for different regions as we grow with partnerships. We welcome other countries and other companies from other countries to partner with us so that we can help bring the technology and scale up faster.
I mean, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense that of course, it's a resource intensive process to build a startup that requires, that a lot of feedstock and then processing them into, you also need to be sure that, okay, you're able to sell to nearby locations. So it makes perfect sense that you have to very carefully pick the geographical location where Restock can work. So now that you mentioned about making products available for your customers as well, and needing staying near to them is also one of the factor. So I was curious about who is the audience that Restock is targeting. Are you targeting food and beverage companies? Because I can see the product you also showed, the spoon. So a lot of products Restock is producing, it's relevant for food F&B.
Well, that's a good question. It varies. I think obviously food service packaging, single-use plastic products that are currently in the market is considered a low-hanging fruit, especially as we're seeing globally more and more bans happening. So this product, yes, it can be a spoon, but we're also developing it as a scooper. So imagine protein powders, imagine detergents. So there's a lot of different products that will kind of move away from what you'd consider traditional packaging and ultimately have a functionality to it. So I can't share all the cool stuff that we're developing, but it goes outside of food packaging, though that has been initially the first goal, as there's been such a strong demand for alternatives to plastics. But we see this developing into a myriad of different types of products.
Okay, okay.
And to
And
answer that part of your question with clients, we want to get challenged by clients. So if there's anybody listening out there, please send us your ideas so that we can see if we can make the product. And from any industry, we're starting to see that there is ways that agricultural residues can replace traditional materials.
it's nice that you're very open to challenges. And my experience in working within Gravy and seeing a lot of sustainable projects and sustainable packaging projects, one challenge I've seen a lot of cellulose based and paper based packaging that they face in F&B industry is the oil barrier and the liquid barrier properties. So a lot of food and beverage companies, they prefer, I'll take an example of paper cups, right? So paper cups, even though being recyclable and made of paper, they need a thin layer of plastic in order to hold liquids, and basically just so that your cup doesn't melt before your coffee goes cold. How is Restock taking care of these? Basically, how does Restock's product are able to tackle those challenges?
No, absolutely good question. And it depends on the product, but ultimately, we don't need to add a plastic. We're using bio coatings for that. And so there are limitations as far as shelf life for certain liquid types of products. This product right now, with just an AKD on it, is doing over 12 hours without any leaking. So depending on the use, we already have products. I can't say we can do every product, and we can't do water bottles yet. But that's sort of where the challenge is, where we're working with new companies and partnering up to find solutions for those bio-based coatings.
Yeah, and I think now that it's a good idea to use bio-based coatings, because I'm seeing a small industry shift towards that as well. A lot of companies are, because big companies, they want to move towards their sustainable goal of using 0% plastic in their packaging, specifically in their single-use plastic products. And earlier, using a plastic layer wasn't really getting them closer to that goal. So bio-based coatings are is the new trend that I've also seen in a lot of products, and I think it's a brilliant idea to move forward. What other technical challenges, similar technical challenges, do you see coming up with, in future, that Restock plans to solve, or maybe already is solving?
It's a good question. I think, again, it's a case by case. So there's no real great specific answer there, because it's when a client comes to you with a new product, the challenge is to figure out how to do it at the right price point, obviously, and then also how to shift over. And so a lot of the issues come with, packaging down the road for the client when they're automating a product. Is this product very similar to a plastic spoon? Yes. But in the filling in an automation setting, is there going to be issues with those lines? So that's often where the conversation can get stunted, because we don't expect clients to rebuild automation lines for millions of units that they're developing annually. So I think that that's often, when you're moving from one material to another, whether it's plastic to cellulose or whatever it may be, understanding that it's not just a product, it's how the product is then going to be used by your client or a consumer. So I think that those are some of the challenges. And again, this is where we want more clients to come and challenge us so that we can find solutions together.
That's a amazing attitude, and I firmly believe that Restock, the product that Restock is making, it has great potential, and of course, you guys are already solving a lot of challenges of the industry. So again, this is similar question, but I think I'd like to rephrase it, just so, again, for our audience only. I see potential of Restock's products in multiple industries, not just F&B, as you all also mentioned, detergent, and so basically cosmetic industry as well. But they also require a long shelf life, or many food and beverage companies also require long shelf life, and even detergent and home care products requires a little bit long shelf life. Specifically, taking an example of a detergent scooper, for example, right? So, does do Restock has a product line that is catering to these long shelf life product companies that they can use?
It's a great question. I think that, again, there's no specific answer. It really depends on the product. So,
Mm.
to use the spoon, since I have it in front of us, when you're looking at a product like that and you are dealing with new consumer behaviors, the question is, what were they doing with it in the first place? Well, they were maybe, just using it as a powder, but maybe they were washing it out. Maybe they were doing certain things that you weren't thinking about when you were producing that product. So we're in the midst of understanding, what does it need to be like shelf life? This can sit on a shelf for a decade and it'll still be there. But if you start getting it wet, if you start doing things that you weren't supposed to design it with, then it's a different issue. So it really depends on, educating your consumers if needed, and then understanding where are the limitations of certain products. Like cellulose is recyclable in a paper stream, right? And so there's going to be limitations if the product is going to get wet over and over again. If it does, then you're going to have to do a bio-based carrier coating, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it really is a case by case where, for a lot of the applications, we don't need to put anything on the product. And in other cases, the client says, well, our consumers might do this or they might do that. Therefore, we need to be able to have a grease barrier or water barrier in case that, they do X or Y. So I think it's been always interesting to kind of discover that, consumer behaviors might shift, especially from country to country.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. And again, I'm very interested in packaging industry, and specifically when I read about Restock, I found your solution like very curious, and because I was not thinking I hadn't thought that agricultural waste can solve such a big problem of packaging industry, even though there were many startups doing here and there some innovation, but not on the scale of totally eliminating agricultural waste, and using it, like using all the agricultural waste that you can. So and hence my repeated questions about the applications of your technology. So
No, for sure. Yeah.
I'll take an example. Yes, Benjamin, you were saying. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, I was going to say it all starts with the farming community. And the reason why that's so important is that I'll travel to France or to Vietnam, or I was in India 10 days ago, and everywhere it's the same story. Agricultural farming groups and farmers need a new revenue stream. They need support. So it's very essential that that part of the supply chain helps, and goes back to the farming community and sees that revenue. We will not be successful otherwise. So we really take pride in building those relationships, which can take a long time. And they're very different because sometimes you're dealing with one farmer, sometimes you're dealing with a million farmers. So, how do you do that? And so I think I just wanted to make a parenthesis that we can go into all these products, but if we aren't there taking care of our farming community, then we won't have a business. So it can solve the packaging problems. It can solve industries in the textile space. We're doing R&D in construction to replace wood products and tiles. But at the same time, you have to understand that it won't be overnight. And there has to be also complementary solutions so that we're not just depleting our raw material production.
Makes perfect sense, and thanks for mentioning that another industry that you plan on expanding, and that's also very interesting. So, Benjamin, I'll change my question. Actually, I have already answered what I was about to ask. Uh, so now I'm interested in knowing more about the technical side of things. So, taking the waste and processing it and turning it into something usable, like the spoon that you were showing. So, what goes into it? And basically, is there any technical challenge that your team faced that you had to solve to make this really successful? So, would you like to share a
Yeah.
story about with me?
Yeah, I mean, without getting into too much of the specifics of how we do it, we are using, well-known technology. What's innovative is how we do it and how we've put technologies together so that we have zero waste. We always say waste is a design flaw. And so we've brought technologies, some of them, date back from over a century. And it's just about setting them up next to each other and to then streamline that process, which up until now, very few companies are actually doing. And so it's not as much as a, innovation in technology unto itself. This is the same process that you have egg crates. We have had egg cartons for, over 50 years.
Hmm.
So it's just about rethinking how we use technology that we already have. There is a lot of new technology and R&D, but Restock focuses, and this is very important, on commercialized technology that we are then bringing into innovation and are able to have a new process innovation around that. We are working at the R&D stage in development at earlier TRLs levels where the technology isn't commercialized. But inside the hubs that we're building, it's all proven technology. So there's always this process that can last 5-10 years even, where you're developing the pilots, where you're solving those solutions technically, and then we implement the actual technology that can be commercialized. So throughout our process, we certainly had a lot of learning curves. We've worked with, oh man, I can't tell you how many technologies to see, hey, can we make this work? Can we make this fit? Which is why we have a very collaborative attitude in general when it comes to that technology piece.
Okay, okay. I see. And of course, when you're making something new and when you're solving a problem that's currently not being solved, you have to go through a lot of different solutions to really see what works. And I totally agree with you that some technologies are at very early stage, not commercialized, and really testing them out for your use or in itself is a challenge. So now I'd love to talk about the later part of things. So how easy it is for, let's say, a very large food and beverage company to incorporate Restock's products into their supply chain?
Look, I mean, you should ask the food and beverage companies. Everyone's a little bit different. Jokes aside, we try to make it as easy as possible to do a one-to-one. But as I kind of coming back to what I was telling you before, sometimes it's not that simple. There is nobody making these types of scoopers for detergents, but yes, we are using them for soup. So yes, overnight you can use it for a soup, and you can then throw it away. But are you going to be able to use it to replace your detergent? Well, it's going to take some time for some of the larger FMCG companies to move towards that direction, for sure. But again, it's the issue with the automation, it's the issue with the shelf life, it's the issue with consumer behaviors. But these are things that we kind of ask to be challenged on and say, let's figure out how to do it. And sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But usually that's not our, it's not the, it's our problem, but it's more about how we adapt to the client's issues. And usually they're very different depending on the client and depending on the region.
So, Benjamin, we can take an example of your past experience with, in case of you have already worked on a lot, some partnerships. What I meant to really dig into was uh, a large, usually these food and beverage companies, they are either looking for ready-made solutions for their products. Maybe Nestle is trying to replace the spoons that comes with their products, or their baby products, for example. Or maybe it could be a case they're looking for raw material that they can simply purchase from a vendor, and then they can use it within their supply chain to again make products as their own specifications. So where does Restock really fit in between these two, between these two extremes?
I mean, again, we're as flexible as needed. I think that's sort of what, as a material innovator and offering new products, we need to bend to the needs of the client, and so that's sort of how we have as a general kind of mantra. It's sort of, we'll solve the problem. And if we don't, then that's sort of where that ends. But I think that, most of the products that we're tackling, which are in the food service packaging, they're already, molded products in this space. Mm. So what we're doing is reducing the carbon footprint using regional agricultural residues. So a lot of the first products we've tackled, they are easy one-to-one replacements. But as we grow and as we move into different sectors like the spoon, then there's new challenges for those products. But when it comes to, crates or cups or, boxes, these are all very simple, basic things that already existed in the market. We're now just using new materials. So that's where there's been a big shift.
I asked about the scale between, like, how flexible is Restock in providing the type of products that your clients require in F&B space. Specifically, are you able to provide them raw materials that they can use to make their own products in their own image, or in their own form factors, or is the ready-made molded products is the primary market that Restock is targeting at the moment?
Molded is the primary market, but obviously we want to be able to be flexible to our clients' needs, and some of them are asking us just for the transformed cellulose. So it kind of can come in different shapes and sizes depending on where the client is and if it makes sense to supply them with the raw material.
Okay. And towards the end, you also mentioned that you're helping them reduce the carbon footprint, and you're also saving agricultural waste. So I'm very interested in carbon footprint part of things, because that's one of the very biggest goal that almost all food and beverage companies, even cosmetic companies, and even some textile industries targeting for. So would you like to share some numbers with me in case Restock has done some research?
Well, yeah, and I'm very careful to share numbers because people throw around numbers, and I often feel like it's a greenwashing. I really think what's the most important to understand is that every product for every client needs to be considered a little differently, because it has a different life, because it has a different utility, because of where it's being sourced currently and where it's going to be sourced in the future. So you really need to do one-to-one comparative analysis. And what I can say, though, is the way we process things is that we take regional residues that are close by within, I think as close as 15 kilometers for all our materials in certain areas as a, circumference. And then, at most maybe 50 to 100 kilometers from our factories. And then we transform it without using any chemicals, using very little water, being able to reuse the water. And so because we have this process, because we're using it close by and we're transforming it, and we're using renewable energies to power it all, we just by that logistics, we are offering a solution that hasn't had to travel very far to get to an end product. And because we're focused on regional customers, it's not going to go very far from our factory until it gets actually used and then recycled. So I think it's really important to understand that it's the smaller the circle. In circularity, I always say the smaller the circle, the stronger the business case. And that's sort of how we're going to, as a community, reduce our carbon footprint, solving the solutions for each business. So if you're a business in Vietnam, it's going to be very different than for France. And we don't want to be servicing products globally out of Vietnam. We want to be servicing regional markets. And so I think it's really important to understand how that works and how just by that conceptualization, we're rethinking how global supply chains have existed.
Understood. Makes sense. And what I meant about numbers was, is there a healthy comparison between? Uh, I'll take the example of spoon because that's I'm also seeing that product again. So, is there a healthy comparison between using this spoon compared to a plastic spoon in terms of production or in terms of the carbon footprint that ends up being there? Uh, there's obviously it's always better to use recyclable product and product based on green materials because that in itself it already reduces the plastic waste. Uh, so what other maybe a statement or some performance matrix that you share with your clients that basically that showcase them the value of switching from a plastic
Well,
product to yeah.
yeah, I mean, again, I mean, there's some more general numbers that can be used, but where the focus really lies is understanding where that client is sourcing that plastic from. Like you can
Hmm.
get to certain plastics that are relatively low cost and low impact, and they're using recycled materials. So at some point or another, it's about where are they sourcing that material from? What are the other issues? Are there allergens? Are there plastic leaching? Is the product going to actually get recycled? So it really can't just be okay. This is what it is for everybody, and for a Unilever or a Danone or a Haagen Dazs, all using spoons, are going to have very different spoons. They're going to have different sourcing processes. So you kind of need to look into the belly ultimately and understand how that supply chain exists and how you're going to fit into that supply chain. So that's sort of the work that we do with clients and say, look, let's understand your product categories. Let's understand your products and where you're sourcing them from. And let's find a way to actually reduce that and add value to your customers at the end of the day. So everyone is kind of a unique situation. Obviously, there's a lot of similarities that we find, but we, and the most important is that we're net positive by design because we're using renewables, because we're using our own waste to power our projects. We really are not increasing a footprint. We're actually, helping reduce it because a lot of the agricultural waste that we were taking was being burned. And so it was creating an emission. And so now we're reducing that unto itself. So, just by the nature of how we do business, we have a heads up from a carbon footprint standpoint and something that we can then pass on to our client.
Yeah, and I think it's also about. I think regulations also play a very big role, and specifically, I'll take an example of Europe. Europe is very strict about regulations around plastic packaging and one-time use plastics. So, is the what kind of regulations is Restock helping or pitching in when talking to these big food and beverage clients? Or
Well,
I wouldn't
again,
even say just talking, but
no, no, and you make a good point. So EU is basically, I think, from a regulatory standpoint, probably the furthest along and the strictest. And so we
yeah,
kind of use that as the basis. So if it can work for a European product segment, then you're pretty sure that it's going to work anywhere in the world.
makes sense. Okay, so is there any specific regulation? Because I remember I think recently as well, US is also following UK's regulation standards, and recently I think ETRI was one of the regulation that was passed around green products in US. So do you keep a track of such regulations in Europe, in
Yeah,
other countries as well?
yeah, and as I said, the EU is pretty much the standard for whether you need to be for food contact or for recyclability, et cetera. So we kind of use that as a standard. Every country's kind of building out their own standards as well, but they're basically mimicking or looking at the EU from a standard perspective. There's so much regulation that you would be drowned in it if you just dealt with every one by one. So
Yeah,
what's clear is that our products have met the requirements for those products inside the EU market as well as the US market. And so we feel very confident that as new regulations come in, our products will also pass all those regulatory concerns.
Makes sense. And Benjamin, with that, I think I'm nearing to the end of my question line. And actually, I wasn't planning on asking you, shotgunning you with so many questions, but I'm just very
That's
curious
fine.
about this whole topic. I hope you also are enjoying it. Uh,
No,
so
always. Great questions. Thank you.
Okay. So Benjamin, like again, as you talked about technical challenges, you've also talked about logistical challenges, like how you plan on placing restocks, basically production houses. So, uh, and you're traveling a lot as well. You mentioned you were in India few weeks ago, and now you're in Vietnam, and you are also being to France. So during all this and during your journey from like very starting to up until now, have you faced moments where you felt like maybe this is not going to work, or maybe this is a challenge that we might not be able to tackle?
This is the future, Shabazz. This is the only way it works. I get
Yeah.
to wake up and be part of it. And I'm very humbled that I get to do what I do today.
So, any advice you would like to share with me and maybe with similar entrepreneurs that are working on a similar scale as you, to
Yeah. Yeah,
basically
yeah, for sure.
that can.
Well, I think more than anything is whenever you feel like you're stuck for companies that are starting up, like ask questions, go to other people, like, communicate. Communication is the way I encourage people to work together and to collaborate. If anyone wants to call me, call us. We're always open to have a conversation at any stage. If it's an idea or if it's, a private equity company, we're always thinking that sharing information helps break the silos. So to me, it's all about collaborating and communication. And so to anybody out there, let's collaborate, let's communicate.
That's good. That's a great message, and it also reflects your not giving up attitude towards things and towards challenges. That do not stop. Just maybe go out there, talk to people, and try to find answers. So that's a
Yeah.
great message.
Yeah, I will say this, like there's a lot of people that have this idea and that's thinking about this. And I remember when we were first talking about this before Restock was a Restock, I met people who were basically in tears and saying, "Oh, we wanted to do this 20 years ago, but we couldn't figure it out." And then you kind of realize that this has been something that's been brewing within humanity around the world. So I think it's just important to know that, this is the way. We used to use, by the way, agricultural residues a lot more
Yeah.
historically, but through the Industrial Revolution, new materials came to be pass, and so now we're coming back to a lot of our older ways because we realized that as we were scaling up industrially at a global stage, we weren't thinking about how we were harming our planet. And we only have one planet as of now. So I think it's really important that everyone starts looking back to the past to find the solutions for the future.
Yeah, we've come full circle now, interestingly. Okay,
Very
Benjamin, so
much.
with that, that was like all I wanted to ask for today's, and I think next steps for us are going to be really process this video and we'll also plan to publish a dedicated article based on our interview and our conversation. And as soon as things go live, I'll make sure that it reaches you first, and I'll share it with you on LinkedIn. And you can also, I mean, you're also feel free to reshare it with your team on your social channels. You can also reuse the videos that we produce. So yeah,
Sounds
and
good.
of
No, I
course, if
appreciate it. I love what you guys are doing. I watched some other videos since. So yeah, keep on doing it. It's really cool that you guys do that as for your clients and just probably fun for you to meet all these new faces and new companies all the time.
definitely, it's really fun for me specifically because I get to talk to so many interesting people and get to learn so many new things. So yes, and of course, if we see any interest from our client or any one of our readers, we'll directly connect you with them, and we'll just step out of the way, just to keep the collaboration going. Uh,
Sounds good.
okay,
Much
Benjamin. So I think,
appreciated, Shabazz. Yeah.
yeah, I think that was it. So I'll send you a LinkedIn request, and let's stay in touch for future.
Sounds good.
Uh,
Have a good day.
okay, bye.